I'm Mike Sibley, leader of the James Moore manufacturing team. I'm here with Kevin Golden, one of my partners and also a member of the James Moore manufacturing team. Today, we are joined once again by Ed Marsh. Ed is a business management consultant who has founded and operated several businesses. Today, as founder of Ed Marsh Consulting, he assists lower middle market industrial manufacturers with strategy and revenue growth. Of course, part of growing your business and one of the drivers to increase your business values are sales leads. Manufacturers need to ensure they have a solid lead generation process that they can effectively manage. So today we are going to discuss several aspects of lead management to help solidify the sales process and obviously continue to increase the value of the business through revenue growth. So Ed, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you on today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoy the conversations with you gentlemen, particularly the way we always bring it back to value. It's not just kind of this abstract theory about let's sell something, but really let's impact the business in a positive way and understand how the revenue growth functions of marketing and sales tie into value generation. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about this stuff. I love talking about it.
Yeah, no, definitely, Ned. It's always good to have you on the show. Always good to get your insights. So thank you again for joining us. And, today when we say the words lead management, what exactly does that mean? Or what do you mean in your words? What does that mean? Because everyone can use those words or hot words, buzzwords, but not always mean the same thing. So to you and your perspective, what do you mean when we say lead
That's a really
management?
important question. You're gonna flip my switch and I'm gonna start rambling. So jump in and interrupt me. If I'm talking too much, but
we will.
So some people listen to this. I think they're gonna feel like, well, geez, I'm being arbitrarily particular about terminology and process. So why is that important? Well, we've learned in manufacturing that we need to develop a common language and specific process in order to consistently create quality. And I mean, you guys, I'm going to outdrive my headlights in a hurry. You guys know better than I do. We've done the same thing in accounting. I mean, we all know what current ratio means. It's a very specific thing. We may debate whether something gets expensed or capitalized, but there's a set of rules and a framework to help us make that decision. So that common terminology helps us have meaningful conversations and benchmarks that we can compare. So why is it important that we do that for leads? I'd say there's two reasons. First, we want to be able to optimize for the revenue opportunities for each lead that we create. And second, we want the data that we need in order to make informed decisions about where we're going to invest. People often say, I know I'm wasting half my marketing dollars. I just wish I knew which half. And so the question is, how can we actually know each half? How can we tie every dollar of marketing to dollars of revenue so that we can make informed and data-based decisions and choices? But that only works if we've got a common language and a common process. And probably a good example is if we think about, let's say we spend $250,000 on trade shows and we send the same on Google AdWords, which is more effective. Well, I mean, obviously we need to know how many leads we're going to get for each, but then we need to know what constitutes a lead. Is it somebody who downloaded something or somebody who scheduled a meeting? And so that means then, of course, we got to have definitions, and often those definitions include a new contact, a lead, maybe a marketing qualified lead, a sales qualified lead, an opportunity, a qualified opportunity. So that's the language, the kind of language that we use with very specific definitions. And we tie our CRM and our marketing automation into those so that follows through our entire process. Once we've done that, we've got the opportunity to actually calculate what each lead costs. But it's often, that's not enough because that's kind of in the abstract. So we can go further. We can calculate what each lead costs per meeting, or what each lead costs per qualified opportunity, or what each lead costs per some unit of first deal revenue or even lifetime revenue. So maybe the cost per lead per $10,000 of revenue or something like that. So now we've got a benchmark for making informed decisions. And rather than just arbitrarily cut marketing or boost marketing based on how we feel our confidence about the economy, for instance, we can invest in lead generation knowing the returns that we're going to get. We can actually pull levers. We know which lever to pull and how hard in order to drive the kinds of outcomes we want. Those outcomes may be short sales cycle. We want to add revenue in a hurry. It may be grow a new product line, which is going to make more time. But we can understand clicks may close, for instance, at a low rate, but quickly, maybe at a lower margin, but maybe some percentage of those turn into long-term customers. Whereas trade shows, they could be very different. I mean, they offer other value, opportunity to meet existing customers, et cetera, but the metrics may be very different. And that comes back to closed loop reporting, because calling a 30-minute conversation belly button to belly button in a trade show booth a lead, and calling a Google AdWords click a lead, and use that same terminology, obviously it's completely different. And so I guess one final point, this only works if we track it. And that means that we need accounting support for the true costs. For a trade show booth, that means not only the booth, but T&E and time from the field and all that kind of stuff. And we need the CRM and marketing automation that are aligned so that we actually track it and we can use the accurate data and the results and the insights in order to make better decisions. So you flip my switch, and there's my long-winded answer to your question.
Well, we're going to, Kevin.
Yeah, I was going to say, and so one thing I just observed from that is not so much is what Ed calls lead versus Kevin versus Mike or anyone else calls a lead. It's as much as it is just your team associated with sales. What do they call lead, and then how are they tracking it and measuring it and so forth? That you're just very consistent there amongst your organization on what that means to you, and then the drivers and costs behind those. So again, it may mean different things and look a little differently depending on, even what branch of manufacturing.
Absolutely. Capital equipment's very different than a consumable, for instance.
Definitely, but very important as far as your team that you're all consistent on. When we say lead, what do we mean?
And make sure you harmonize between marketing and sales too.
Right.
So let's take it a little bit step further then, I guess, talking about typical sales cycle. What does that look like for the typical manufacturer you get involved with versus what it should look like?
Well, I think Kevin just made a great point that depending on the kind of manufacturing, the product or service that you're selling, the size of transactions, what level of the organization you sell to, degree of commoditization, all of those things make a difference. But let's say sales cycle is one metric, and that's how long it takes to move, for instance, from lead to order. Sales process is different, and that's the set of steps that are required. And then we may have specific expectations for the process of lead follow-up. So sales cycle can happen even variable within a certain category. I mean, we've all had situations where out of the blue, a prospect pops up and orders quickly because a competitor dropped the ball, or they've got a new customer opportunity that requires fast delivery and we're the only ones that can do it. But generally, you're going to know how long it takes to move from lead to meeting to opportunity to closed one to the following reorder. Sales process is relevant because we've got the opportunity, for instance, to create opportunity scorecards or deal scorecards that make sure that our deals that are in the pipeline forecast are all qualified to a common standard so that the forecast is actually meaningful, not just somebody issued a quote, so now it's 80% propensity to close, and we're going to put that in our forecast that way, which is, it's silly. Then nobody trusts the forecast. If we have a consistent process, we know that the forecast is meaningful. And if we're finding discrepancies, we could go back and we can adjust the process to make sure that it's correct. In terms of the lead follow-up, we have to have consistent expectations. I mean, some reps often look at some leads and they just arbitrarily decide on their own because of job title or industry or company size or something they've heard somewhere along the way that those leads aren't necessarily worthy of follow-up. And maybe they even use their own BANT process for it, the budget, authority, need, and timeline, and say, well, I don't think they've got a real project. They don't have a budget. They're not ready to talk to me, and they just ignore it. When we do that, though, all of that data that we talked about collecting in order to make better decisions becomes degraded because there's no standard to it. And that's, I think, reflected in the fact that I often see that maybe only a third of leads actually get more than a couple follow-up emails. There's often no phone calls. And, the natural outcome of that, it's no surprise, those leads never turn into anything. But what we don't know is whether they could have or should have. And so if we back up and if we set some standards, how quickly will we respond? Within an hour, within a day, within a week? And it's going to depend on a variety of things. How many attempts are we going to make? How many channels are we going to use? There's a lot of research that shows that we might need to consistently make more than 10 touches in order to connect with somebody. And those probably need to be across email, and phone and video message and social media, maybe postal mail and SMS, and maybe tapping mutual connections. Hey, can you connect me with this person? They had some interest. They need to follow a tempo. You can't just do 2 of them and then wait 3 weeks until you got some time and come back and do more. Marketing has to be involved. We have to use agreed language and email templates and call scripts. We should have sales enablement content that our people can use to add value when they reach out rather than just ask for a meeting. And then all of this needs to be tracked. There's got to be accountability, and managers have to be empowered and willing to reassign leads that reps are falling behind on. There should be dashboards and automatic alerts so that the reps know and the managers know, and the people that are making the investments know whether there's a lack of follow-up, but also what it means in terms of the return, the meetings, the qualified opportunities, pipeline, close $1, lifetime value dollars generated from them. And then kind of one crazy additional idea that I'll tell you is going to freak some people out. It's going to piss off a lot of salespeople that might be listening. But I would suggest, as an experiment, you might consider charging your reps for leads. So in other words, you kind of maintain a ledger. You know what your cost per lead is, and every lead you give them will increase the balance that they owe you for those leads. Now, they earn credit and pay those lead charges off by either turning a lead into a meeting or following the complete agreed follow-up process. So basically, no rep should end up owing anything unless they're lazy or ignoring it or don't understand the process or failing to follow it. And then, you've got the decision. You can either net that against their commissions or give them a mulligan and explain why it was important to try it again. So I think the follow-up piece is really critical.
Well, so you're quantifying, you're creating a way you want a behavior to be, and you're quantifying it, and you're monetizing it, so to speak, and going down that road. Yeah, I kind of like that idea, because you're right. At the end of the day, as a company, you don't necessarily have to charge them, so to speak, but you could certainly affect commissions and affect other things if they're not being responsible, because you're paying for time, you're paying for the technologies, the travel, the whatever it might be that's creating this cost. And so they need to be held accountable for working it the right way in an efficient way as possible.
And they need to even just understand what a lead costs. It's not just an inconvenience of their time that somebody's asking them to follow up on. The company has spent real money to put this in front of them.
Yeah, especially if you're talking trade shows. I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars in some cases, depending on the trade show and travel and
Absolutely.
Everything else that kind of goes along with that.
Well, and two, I think, that awareness then in some people, not everyone, also creates that sense of responsibility. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize. So now I do. It just makes it a lot more real and tangible than this intangible conference or trade show or whatever it is that we go to. Also, I was wondering while you were talking, Ed, about, hey, kind of thinking you've got to make this, in order for people to follow certain process, procedure, and so forth, you've got to make it ingrained in what they do every day, right? Not just create the behavior and then it becomes ingrained. It has to be. And so I like that kind of with the costing or whatnot, if you will. Then that now becomes ingrained because, everything somebody does is for compensation at some point. And so hitting someone's wallet or making it integrated into what they do every day, that they literally can't function and do their job unless they follow certain protocol to make sure that gets done. That's no quicker way to create a habit or get someone to do it. So
it also goes back to a conversation that we had at one point about hiring second and third standard deviation, really the right of the distribution curve, top level talent, because people like that are going to appreciate being held accountable. They're going to value the fact that you're sharing this information with them, arming them with this information, giving them the tools, nudging them, keeping them in line. Good people like that kind of support and help.
Well, I think at the end, the other part of that, yes, the really good people are going to appreciate that. The other thing I think people appreciate is, not working harder than you have to. And if you've got an efficient structure, a process that you build, that you follow, that works, your close rate is likely going to be higher, which means you're going to have more success and probably don't have to, you're probably just going to make your job easier at the end of the day when you look at it from that standpoint. So, there's a lot of pluses, but I also often talk about, when you're dealing with a process and you're dealing with people, part of it is making sure they understand the why. Why are we doing this? This isn't just because we like producing paperwork or we like doing it's there's a method to the madness, right? Well, maybe there's not a method now, but when you do put a method in, there is a method, and hopefully it's backed with data that proves that it works. And you got to get into the why. And I think when people understand the why and they understand the transparency that you're bringing, then I think you're going to get a little bit more of the buy-in to the process.
Yeah, not just Big Brother looking over their shoulder demanding they use a CRM, but a set of tools and thoughtful process designed to make them more effective and efficient.
Yep. No, great advice. Great. I love it. So Ed, what other parts of that, and maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, sales cycle or sales life, could be more efficient to, enhance that
Yeah,
process?
I think that perfect question. It piggybacks on exactly what Mike was just saying. And I mean, I guess I can answer that in two ways. First, when you use that common and consistent lexicon and process, then you get that meaningful data. I mean, maybe those trade show leads convert to meetings at a very different rate than the organic content marketing or partner co-marketing referrals. And then the rate at which they convert from meeting to qualified opportunity is further different. But you got the data to understand where each one has drop-offs, where in the process there is inefficiency or some kind of a problem that you can focus on, try to understand the root cause and improve the process. The second way I'd answer it is just more categorically, the biggest drop-off in my experience is from the initial lead to the meeting. And if it takes 10 steps to actually get somebody to reply and to schedule a meeting, that's hard. It can annoy the prospect. It frustrates the salesperson. Salespeople feel like they're doing all this work, not getting results. So often a great place to start is just to figure out how we can push the dots closer together to connect somebody who's live and interested with the meeting. And technology can be a great way to do that. It can be in a trade show booth where you're talking to somebody face to face, but you've got a 2D barcode that they scan that takes them immediately from their mobile device to a scheduling link. And so that would set a cookie. It would make it easy to schedule a meeting. You're not doing follow-ups when people are trying to catch up after being traveling and at a trade show, but that meeting is scheduled and it's on the calendar. If somebody's on your website, it could be a chatbot that engages more effectively in real time and progressively instead of some long form on the contact us page, and makes it easy for somebody to just say, hey, yeah, this sounds good. Please connect me live now with somebody who can help me. And that can quickly go to a Zoom meeting just while they're there and spending the time and it's top of mind, or maybe it goes to a scheduling link and you get that meeting on the calendar. But both of those can eliminate a lot of those inefficient and frustrating steps. If we think of it in I'm not a lean expert or Six Sigma, but I mean, this term muda, the waste that we want to excise from process, that's an example of trying to remove some of that waste. And so if we bring that manufacturing efficiency mindset over to revenue growth, we can find opportunities to do the same thing. We can also think of it in terms of continuous improvement. I mean, the data will show us, okay, once we fix one problem, there still is always a biggest problem. What's the next biggest friction point where we can brainstorm it and research best practices and find technology or better talk tracks or improve scripts or whatever the case may be that can help us improve efficiency. And often it feels foreign for manufacturers, but a great go to look for ideas is what SaaS teams, software as a service sales teams, are doing, because they're under such intense pressure from investors and it's such a competitive space that they're constantly experimenting and looking for interesting ideas. I guess the way that I would recommend thinking of it, we talk about OEE in manufacturing. Well, if we want to improve the efficiency, let's talk about, my term is ORE, or overall revenue effectiveness. Let's apply the same set of the mindset and methodologies that make us good in manufacturing and operations and apply them to marketing and sales.
I think, and we've talked about this on a number of our shows together that we've done. Sales is it's a process to generate the sale. It's, whatever that process might be is going to look a little different depending on the environment, like we discussed earlier. But the bottom line, this is a process that can be instituted, that can be improved, that can be improved over time, that people can follow. It's not just, well, it could be, it could be somebody who's just really good at picking up a phone and closing a deal. It's not typically, what you see, especially if you want to bring new people, if you've got growth, right, or if you've got turnover, if you want to bring somebody else in, it's just like the manufacturing floor. Right. The better your process is in place, the easier it is for you to slide somebody else into that process for them to pick up and continue producing whatever the item is. And sales, accounting, HR, there's processes in each of those areas. And, I think sometimes we just, this is kind of stepping back big picture. We sometimes just think of sales as somebody picking up a phone or going out and meeting, and that's all there is to it. Hopefully the deal closes. But, the companies I work with, there's a very structured processes that they go through in order to get this done. And I just don't think it's thought of necessarily that way. So I think it's good to bring it back. So any other best practices in terms of improving the lead process that you might want to impart on us? And I was also wondering, as part of that, if you might jump in a little bit on what exactly, when you say qualified lead, what are you saying there, just to kind of bring that piece home a little bit?
Yeah, so let's do the qualified lead thing first. And I'd say, going back to your beginning comments, that could differ from your company or my company or any other company. We might define qualified lead differently. However, you need to have that definition internally. And I would recommend that of all the terms, that might be the one that would there be the most harmonization between companies. Mm-hmm. I would say a qualified lead is something where you believe it is likely to close. In other words, their compelling reason to buy. You've quantified the cost of inaction. You've met with the decision maker and have a commitment that they prefer to do business with you. You're clear on what the timeline is for them to make a decision, and why that timeline is not arbitrary but has to happen, and the consequences if it doesn't. You've accumulated all that information. You've met with, let's say, a typical complex buying team now is 10 people. You've met with, let's say, at least 7 of them. And you understand the dynamics and who's in favor and who's opposed and who has another vendor preference, who doesn't want to do anything. So you've got all that information, so the reasons it might not close, the reasons it should, and when it's going to. That's what I would call a qualified opportunity. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I just thought, since I think part of having a process, to your point, understanding what that means is an important part of any process. Because if you're wasting your time, in other words, if they're out there just shopping price just to make sure their current vendor is giving them what they want, but they don't want to switch, and are you going to spend days and hours and weeks or whatever trying to track this down when they're clearly just trying to use you as column fodder? Right. And so it's not as opposed to doing all the things you said. To me, that's an important part of making a process more efficient.
Absolutely. And you think, most CRM out of the box has something like issued a quote is 80% likely to close. And if that's the way you build your forecast, and then you go to sit down with your banker and review your covenants and talk about the forecast, and it's built on that kind of faulty data, you lose credibility. So it's really important to agree on that.
Agree.
In terms of, I think the question was lead generation and lead processing. It's an interesting time right now because there's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of changes in how people buy. And I think one of the best characterizations I've heard of that is somebody recently said, nothing works and everything works. So in other words, it's much harder to generate and convert leads. That's the nothing works part of it. At the same time, you can. Good old-fashioned prospecting by phone and email and introductions remain really important. Inbound marketing, content marketing, organic, as well as some kinds of trade journal advertising, certainly trade shows. They can work. They just work differently than they used to. So let's back up and think about maybe what we can say 3 different approaches. There's inbound lead generation, which is attracting people to us. That's often content marketing. You might have great social media content, not pitching, but creating awareness around the problems and outcomes, not the products and services, and that would attract people to you. You certainly want a great YouTube channel that builds trust and familiarity with your leaders and subject matter experts. Exactly what you all are doing with this podcast and on your YouTube channel. And you want your experts and industry leaders speaking at industry events and participating in organizations. So that's kind of the inbound part, the attract those to you. Then there's outbound, which is traditional, and we might say that's kind of interrupting. And that includes the basic sales blocking and tackling, regular prospecting, cold calling, email prospecting, and that kind of thing. It could be trade journal ads, not just for branding, but specific trackable lead generation, maybe using a 2D barcode in the ad so you know exactly what's working. Trade shows, promoted content, paid ads, those are some of the outbound. And then there's kind of a very traditional approach that's now being respun with a fancy new name on it that's getting more attention, and that's around partnerships and alliances, including co-branding and sales channel and adjacent companies. And that's now being called nearbound. And some describe that if outbound is interrupting, inbound is attracting, nearbound is kind of surrounding. And on the one hand, like I said, it's very traditional. I mean, a lot of companies in the industrial space have sold through distributors and reps and agents for years. But this goes further. It's about community. Often there are professional communities that form around Slack or Discord groups, and maybe there's a membership, and maybe they have some events. Events are another example of it. There's joint thought leadership and campaigns and co-marketing. So adjacent kinds of businesses might say, we're going after the same customers that want value from us, and we want to provide value in areas that may not necessarily be our core competency, but we've got a great affiliation with this group that can help us do that. And so you build mutual kind of prospect pools. And often that can extend to making warm introductions to each other's existing customers, or in some cases even co-selling. And then, so if we got inbound, outbound, and nearbound, there's a slightly different flavor that many of your companies probably talk about, and that's what we used to call target account sales, or in kind of a more updated approach, companies are describing as account-based go-to-market, marketing and sales combined. I think what happens in the industrial space is that too often target accounts end up being selected by reps who get an email from the sales manager that says, oh, by the way, I need your target account list. They do a quick run through their memory. They pick the biggest accounts that they remember in their territory. That becomes the target account list, as opposed to a much more analytical process of selecting an ideal set of accounts based on what we might call an ICP, or ideal customer profile, that considers attributes that are quantitative and qualitative. So it could be whether they're privately or publicly held. It could be the number of employees. It could be the number of locations they have, or what states they're located in. But it could also be their philosophy about growth. Are they interested in growing quickly, or are they happy to grow very slowly? Or do they invest in quality? Do they sell themselves as a premium brand and invest that way? Or do they invest based on price? All of those kinds of things would fit into it. So that's a much longer term play. I mean, the goal often is, let's get a first meeting in each of those target accounts within a year. It's not necessarily let's get an order. It's let's get a meeting. And so there's a lot of work and collaboration between marketing and sales, and even team selling. I mean, a lot of times in that sort of a situation, you might want the president or GM or CEO to be calling to their counterpart in that target account and building a relationship there, maybe at an event that they're both at, or by being on the same board of directors somewhere or something, in order to kind of parallel path while the marketing and sales team are working at establishing a connection at the right level.
Yeah, that's interesting. So getting more analytical and purposeful to improve your chances.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And build a long-term relationship probably at the same time.
For sure.
That's key to sort of that sticky customer, and, bringing that back to value, value of the business. One of the value drivers is having some sticky customers, right? So right. That's a very interesting thought process. Well, Ed, thank you so much for all this information today. We really appreciate having you on the show. That's, as always, you're guiding manufacturers down the right road in terms of things they need to be thinking about.
Well, it's always a pleasure. I really enjoy chatting with you guys. And I just encourage people, every time I talk to somebody in manufacturing, I suggest, hey, think about treating your revenue growth the same way you do your production operations, and think about the same accountability. You wouldn't tolerate an AR clerk that only sends a third of the invoices, or you don't tolerate a sales rep that only follows up on a third of the leads. I guess I just throw out there, in case anybody's interested, I do offer a pretty simple, straightforward lead follow-up audit that can give a very quick and good insight for companies into what they're doing with leads, how they're following up on them, that can open some eyes and help to begin to create some of the frameworks that we've been talking about.
Well, great. And that sounds like a really good, useful resource, especially considering all the things we talked about today and where all the, all the issues could be. So Ed, once again, thanks. Appreciate having you on here. And for all the listeners, thank you for listening in. As always, feel free to call us if you ever have a question or need a resource. And as Ed as well with his resources that he can bring to your table. So again, hope everyone has a great day, and thank you for listening.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.